This week, we are talking about some of the worst, most toxic business advice that we've heard. Welcome back to Faith and Focus, a companion podcast to the TSA Weekly podcast, designed specifically for Christian business owners, helping us to seek God in all that we do in our business. So, we all know that there's a lot of business advice out there that is just not good for a lot of reasons. But a lot of the advice that's even considered good does not align with God's wisdom or with our values. So, over on TSA Weekly, we talked about 4 different pieces of toxic advice. I also shared a story over there of some toxic advice that I followed that just it didn't work out very well for me. So, you might want to go check that out and see if you might be falling into the same trap because maybe you can get out of it faster than I did. But in this episode, I want to just look at 2 of the pieces of toxic advice that we talk about over there, and then also talk about them from a biblical perspective. But before we dive into this, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell so that you never miss a tutorial or upload. Okay, so one of the pieces of toxic advice that we talked about over there was from none other than Mark Zuckerberg, where he said basically that passion on its own is enough to make you successful. His quote was, just a reminder if you haven't seen it over there, if you just work on stuff that you like and you're passionate about, you don't have to have a master plan with how things will play out. So not true. And we talked over there all in detail about why this is toxic and all this stuff. Passion is wonderful. It is a gift, but it is absolutely not a business plan. So if you want to get into more of the details, head over there for that. But I want to look at this from God's perspective too, because we joke as Christians a lot about, oh, you know how to make God laugh? Make plans, stuff like that. But that doesn't mean that he does not advise us to make plans for things. In fact, he absolutely encourages us and advises us to make plans and be intentional. It's such a cultural thing right now to follow your heart. And there are so many great videos out there just like blowing that whole concept out of the water. But I just want to bring up a couple of verses here just to get you thinking, get you going, and hopefully get you diving into the word yourself so that you can see more context around this, but also just give God an opportunity to speak to you in this area. So, God's perspective on this from Proverbs 16:3, it says, "Commit your work to the Lord and your plans will be established." Well, that's a pretty clear black and white. If you don't have plans, how could they be established, right? But at the same time, you need to be focusing on committing your work to the Lord. Your focus, your desire, your purpose should be on furthering God's will. And your plans should be trying to head you in that direction. And if you are committing to the path that God is laying in front of you, then your plans, they will be established. And then in Luke 14:28 says, "For which of you desiring to build a tower does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it?" Yeah. I mean, that just seems so logical to me that if you're going to sit and build something, a business, a tower, whatever, you need to sit down and figure out, do you have what you need? If you were going to bake something or cook something, you need to sit down first and look and see, do I have all the ingredients or do I need to go out and get something? That is planning. That is the wisdom of God, is to sit down and make sure that you know how you plan on achieving something. But to my earlier point about the joke that we all make about what God thinks of our plans, you have to always remain open to his voice and open to what he might be telling you and pivoting you in a different direction. Passion is a huge part of it, but letting yourself be led by your own emotions versus being led by God's voice and God's wisdom is kind of a recipe for disaster. So over on TSA Weekly, we had some takeaways from each of these as far as like kind of replacing that toxic business advice. So here we're going to go a step further with it than I did over there on this one. And we're going to say passion plus obedience plus stewardship equals success in God's timing. Right? I think there's that desire that we all have to see that success when we want to see it, which for most of us is immediate. But that idea of in God's timing is absolutely vital here, is that we aren't necessarily going to succeed in the time frame that we want or expect, or in the way that we want or expect. In fact, I have an interesting story about this. I have a friend who I did a lot of shows with in LA when I was doing stuff in my 20s, and he really, 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 really wanted to be on Broadway. I mean, it was just like his live stream. And so he picked up and he moved to New York and he started going out, auditioning for a bunch of stuff, and just it wasn't really working out for him. He was struggling. He was feeling like, is this ever going to happen for me? And should I just give up and go back to LA or, whatever? Like he just thought that maybe this wasn't for him. And so he was kind of sitting around feeling bad for himself, I'm sure. And one of the things that he loved doing is something that was just kind of therapeutic for him was baking. He started just baking cookies and, of course, eating them and then realizing, okay, I can't eat all these cookies because it's going to be problematic. And so then he started giving them away. And then people started telling him, you should be selling these. And so he started selling them through mail order. Cut to now, and he owns a huge business in New York called Schmackeries. Shout out to Zach Schmall. He created this business. He now has, I think I just saw him open maybe a third location, but he has multiple locations in New York. And I've heard him talk about even branching out into other states, but I'm not sure about that yet. But essentially, and he has said this as well, essentially, he found his success on Broadway, right? He is a success on Broadway, even so much so that Broadway stars and Broadway shows actually send each other Schmackery's cookies for opening night. Actually, they were even featured in, if you watch Only Murders in the Building on Hulu, they were featured. They were like the suspected murder weapon in, I want to say it was season 3. I mean, huge. But obviously, his plan was to be a success on Broadway as an actor, as a singer, as a performer, not as a baker. But it doesn't always work out the way we expect. It doesn't mean that you're not still a huge success. So I just think that's such a great reminder for me that I need to stay open to God's voice in every situation. And, maybe the direction that I think my business is going in or that I might want it to go in is not what his plan is. So staying open to that is important and we can still achieve a huge amount of success. And then the other toxic advice that we're going to talk about over here is the one that came from Bill Gates, which was basically work harder always. And he said, I never took a day off in my 20s, not one. Well, this one should be more obvious why it's toxic. I mean, we've talked about kind of that hustle culture here before. In fact, I think it was the very first episode of Faith and Focus where we talked about the importance of having a Sabbath. God very, very clearly established the example of rest and the importance of rest in everything in our lives and in our businesses. This is evident to us in Exodus 20, verses 8 through 10, when God first established the Sabbath as a commandment, basically. He said, remember to observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. You have 6 days each week for your ordinary work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath day of rest dedicated to the Lord your God. On that day, no one in your household may do any work. This includes you, your sons and daughters, your male and female servants, your livestock, and any foreigners living among you. Pretty sure this is the verse that we used in the first episode as well. It's very, very clear. Now, is he saying Sunday is your Sabbath? No, not necessarily. I think a lot of us choose that because that's when our churches meet, and so it already feels set apart and set aside as kind of a holy day of rest for us. And so I think especially if you're trying to build Sabbath into your business, Sunday is a great day for that. But I don't think the specific day that you choose is as important as the fact that you do it. And then we see this also in the New Testament, where in Matthew 11:28, he says, come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Hard work is so important. And as a business owner, you will not succeed if hard work is not a huge part of your strategy and a huge part of your recipe. But constantly working and constantly pushing forward without rest is not from God. It is not what he wants for you. It is not his desire for you. He wants you to have that balance. He commands you to rest. It is important for that to be just as non-negotiable as the hard work that I know each and every one of you is putting into your businesses on a regular basis. So, our takeaway here is that success isn't about working the most hours, it's about faithfully managing and being a good steward of everything that God has given you. So, I'm curious, do you find yourself struggling with one or the other of these more often? Either being led by your passion and your emotions more than strategy and planning, or working too hard and not giving yourself enough space for rest? Let me know in the comments. I hope this episode encouraged and inspired you. And if it did, please share it with another Christian business owner that could use the same encouragement. Thanks for being here. God bless you and your business. See you in the next episode.